Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very long overdue World of Tanks video here on the Get Bag of the Great channel. Now today we'll be taking a look at, oddly enough, a premium tank that I actually don't own. The French Tier 8 premium medium tank, the M4A1 Revalorise. Now, obviously the M4A1 implies that it is actually a Sherman tank, and therefore American, and not French. But as you will learn if you look into the history of the Second World War and the history of the Free French forces, after the fall of France, the French realised that A, they didn't have that much access to any of the tanks they'd built before the war, and B, a lot of the tanks they had built were pretty rubbish compared to their German counterparts. Not so much compared to the Italian counterparts. The Italian tanks during the Second World War, while having some success, were quite ineffectual. But there was some worth in the French tank design, generally speaking, although it, much like the British tank design in the years leading up to the Second World War, advanced nowhere near as quickly as it arguably should have done, and as a result the French were quite woefully underprepared when the Germans came to invade their country, despite the fact that they had a fairly large army and a one that was moderately well equipped, at least for the time. So as a result, the Germans, who had only a comparable amount of tank compared to the French, managed to sweep them aside considerably well, although this was also in large part down to the fact that the Germans had much better communication between their air force, artillery, infantry and armoured units. But the Revalorise. Now what makes this special? Well, it's a French medium tank, or well, rather an American-made one, with a very French weapon. Now, this gun is a very particular note of interest amongst the guns of the other Tier 8 premium medium tanks that you can commonly buy in the World of Tanks store. It is a 105mm D1504 L51 super gun, because this thing does a hell of a ton of damage. Now, its rate of fire isn't amazing, it's only 4.69 rounds a minute, which means that this thing, with no upgrades, will probably get off only about 4 or 5 shots a minute. Not amazing for a medium tank of this tier. Not entirely unrespectable, but still, when you compare it to other Tier 8 mediums, and especially other Tier 8 premium mediums, it's not overtly impressive. However, what makes this gun especially special is its penetration value and its average damage. It has the highest alpha damage out of any of the guns on any of the Tier 8 premium mediums in the game, and to add on top of that, its decent penetration of 200 on its standard, 250 on its premium ammo, and 53 on its high explosive. And you get a tank that, while not having the damage to minute output of some of the other Tier 8 mediums in the game and other Tier 8 premium mediums, makes up for it, I believe, in raw punch power. And that's why this tank generally works, I believe, as a support vehicle or a long-range sniper. Think of it kind of like as a very, very mobile tank destroyer, because while it is also probably not one of the most mobile Tier 8 premium mediums, it's also still very mobile for what it is and how it's designed and how heavy it is. The reason why I say that is because this thing, while only having a 550 engine horsepower, has a weight load limit of anywhere between 35 to 40.2 tons. And when you compare that to some of the other Tier 8 premium mediums, you realise that the engine to weight load ratio of the Revalorise isn't as important as some of its contemporaries, as in some of its Tier 8 premium medium tank contemporaries. Now, we'll look at a tank that I have, the AMX CDC. This thing weighs considerably less, only between 34.45 tons to 37.8, but with an engine horsepower of 1200. This thing is remarkably quick, and very much so, and it's also far more manoeuvrable and much better at mountain climbing than the Revalorise. However, the Revalorise does trump it in at least two aspects, that being the fact that it has a much more punchier, alpha damage centric gun, and also the fact that it has a much more penetrating gun. And I guess you could also add on the third stipulation that it is much more heavily armoured than the CDC. The CDC only has hull armour of 30 at the front, 20 on the sides and rear, and turret armour of the same disposition, whereas the Revalorise has a fairly impressive hull armour of 50 at the front and 38 at the sides and rear, and 63 all round on the turret. And considering this is an American Sherman, all of that armour is fairly well curved. The only place where it kind of isn't is on the sides, on the main body, and of course on the back near where the engine is. But generally speaking, it's a very well designed machine, and even though it doesn't have as good, or rather as thick armour as some of the other Tier 8 premium medium tanks, it's still well designed enough that you can bounce some shots off of it. And considering that it's an American medium tank, you can bet that turret and that gun mantlet do a fair bit of bouncing on their own. Now, while I personally prefer the CDC myself, I can admit that it is nowhere near capable of tanking it up close and personal like the Revalorise can in some situations. But then, when you look at the other Tier 8 premium medium tanks in the game, they have a much better ability at doing this than the Revalorise. The British FV4202, it has a engine to horsepower of 650 and weight to load limit of 41.59 to 44.75. So it has a comparable weight to engine limit, but it also has the added benefit of having much better hull armour of 50 at the front and 50 at the sides, as well as 31 at the back, with turret armour of 200 at the front and 90 at the sides and rear. The T-54 first prototype is much the same, with even better hull armour in fact. 120 at the front, 90 at the sides, 45 at the rear, and turret armour of 200 at the front, 120 at the sides, and 75 at the rear. Then we go towards the Chinese Tank 59 pattern. 100mm at the front of the hull, 80 at the sides, 45 at the rear. Not as good at turret armour as the FV4202 or the T-54 first prototype, with turret armour at the front of 177, 76 at the sides, and 50 at the rear, but still considerably better than what the Revalorise has. And again, it's an American design tank that was essentially a Chinese rip-off, so you know the turret, again, is going to bounce a lot of shots. Then we look at the Japanese STA-2. This is the only other tank, apart from the CDC, where I'd say it only has as good as, if not slightly worse, armour than the Revalorise does. Now, its hull armour is about the same, but its turret armour is actually thicker, but I would still say the Revalorise is personally better at bouncing shots than the STA-2. Now, I have the STA-2 on myself, and I do actually really like it, and there have been quite a few situations where I've been able to bounce shots off of the turret based on where I've positioned the tank, and it's arguably a much more manoeuvrable machine, considering while it only doesn't have as much of a impressive engine horsepower as some of the other Tier 8 premium medium tanks, being only 570, and it only being slightly better than the 550 horsepower on the Revalorise, the fact that it is so much lighter than the Revalorise, it being at only 34.45 tonnes to 37, means that its horsepower to weight ratio is considerably better than the Revalorise. So while this tank might not have as good armour, much like many of the other Tier 8 premium medium tanks, it is much more manoeuvrable. Again, same kind of goes for the Panzer 58 Mutz, which has a weight-load ratio of 600 engine horsepower compared to weight-load limit of between 35.1 tonnes to 40 tonnes. So it is only about as much, if not slightly less heavier than the Revalorise, with a considerably higher engine power, or considerably higher horsepower. And if you add on top of that the fact that it also has a considerably higher traverse speed and a considerably higher hull and turret armour, then you would say that this is arguably a much better tank to employ in the same kind of way that you would employ a Revalorise. The only tank that I would arguably personally have over the Revalorise just based on raw stats, or rather that I would have the Revalorise over in terms of raw stats, pardon my messing up of my words, it happens a lot, you'll find here on this channel, is the American Tier 8 premium medium tank, the T26 E4 Super Pershing. Now, this thing is the slowest out of the Tier 8 premium medium tanks. It only has an engine horsepower of 500, and it's probably the heaviest, if I think about it, with a weight load limit of between 50.55 tonnes to 53 tonnes, and that engine horsepower of only 500, with a dog-awful traverse speed of 33.38. Now, for a heavy tank, that wouldn't be too bad, but for a Tier 8 Premium Medium, that's pretty lackluster. And it is, generally speaking, the most unmanoeuvrable medium tank at this tier, I would say. But, again, much like a number of the other Tier 8 Premium Medium tanks, it has considerably better hull and turret armour, and it has the added benefit over many of those tanks of having spaced armour on a lot of its body and the front of its turret. Although, to be fair, while the Super Pershing does have a lot of added benefits, such as increased gun depression and very good rate of fire and armour penetration, it is, I would say, gun for gun, tank for tank, and stats for stats, probably the weakest out of the Tier 8 Premium Medium tanks. But if you're basing all of like the strengths and the rankings of the Tier 8 Premium Mediums in the game on raw stats, then you would say the second weakest, arguably, would be the Revalorise. But here's the thing, and this is the thing I'll always maintain. You can have a tank that might not be as strong as its contemporaries, but it can become the weapon of the gods in the hands of the right driver. And that is what today's replay, supplied to me by, again, my good friend Telescuffle, will demonstrate to you guys, and I hope you'll be fairly entertained by it, if not at least a little bit educated. Anyway, let's get on to it. And now, here we are at the main piece de la resistance, the main course of this video, the bit that everyone enjoys, or at least I hope so, the rain replay. I mean, let's face it, this is the bit that has all the action. You can look at all the technical stuff, but like I said earlier, the main strength behind a tank, whether or not it's a tank with good stats or not, is the driver. And considering it's online gaming, good drivers are, they're a speciality. Let's just leave it at that. Let's be nice and kind about it. Now, I must apologise for the somewhat chuggy and slow gameplay in certain sections of this replay, because I am unfortunately recording this through the replay system on World of Tanks using fraps. But I have to give thanks anyway to Telescuffle for giving me this excellent replay regardless, because it is quite the treat. I'm hoping at some point soon to get slightly better recording equipment and software with which to record gameplay like this, because when I record certain games like VR Chat or World of Tanks, it does chug a little bit, hence the reason why when I'm recording background footage for the Kitcast podcasts, I usually tend to have the World of Warships or World of Tanks footage on in the background more than anything, just so you know you can concentrate on me or Phil or any other guests on the podcast just talking about whatever we're talking that episode. Now, as you can see here, Telescuffle is using the Revalorise to its main fullest effects. He's using the decent manoeuvrability and speed of this thing and using its gun to full effect, because he knows that he cannot get into a upfront toe-to-toe gun battle. If he tries to do that with the Revalorise, he will get torn apart, because while this thing is fairly manoeuvrable, it's not as manoeuvrable as, well, the most manoeuvrable Tier 8 tank. It's fairly manoeuvrable and it is fairly quick, but compared to a large number of the Tier 8 Premiums, as we saw earlier, and particularly compared to a large number of the normal Tier 8 Mediums, this thing isn't as manoeuvrable as some of those things. But generally speaking, in terms of the whole scope of Tier 8 tanks, the Revalorise is still very manoeuvrable and fairly quick. And, well, as it should be, it is based off of a Sherman after all. And the reason why Telescuffle is not getting into any toe-to-toe fights and doing any large strips of damage all at once is because he knows that manoeuvrability is arguably his main strength here on the Siegfried Line map. And so he's taking the opportunity to pop in and out, do big chunks of damage at once, and then pop back with his good manoeuvrability and big punchy alpha damage centric gun doing the talking for him more than anything else. And that's the best way to use this tank on this map, or really any other map, because even with other medium tanks, even though they might only have usually as comparable armour as the Revalorise, that's really the best way to use this tank, is as a long-range mobile sniper tank, or as a medium-range support tank. It is not a brawler, not in the slightest sense of the word. Now, that doesn't mean you can get up close and take opportunistic shots like on that IS-3 there, but again, generally speaking, I would say it is much wiser to take this thing into battle as a mobile long-range sniper. It has the armour and manoeuvrability to act maybe as a baller at tier 5, but even then, the Sherman was never a baller, so even if you're driving one of the tier 5 or tier 6 Shermans, unless it's the Easy 8, don't brawl with it. Ever. Just use it as a pop-in, pop-out, snapshots off sort of thing, like Telescuffle did on that Jagdtiger there. Now, Telescuffle has only gotten 1 kill at this point in the game, and the scores are level, but as you'll find out, with World of Tanks, playing it online, things can change in an instant, for both Telescuffle and his team. Now, a short while ago they were leading by 1 tank kill, but again, that is going to change quite considerably. Although not without much difficulty, because, well, Telescuffle's team aren't doing terribly. It's not an amazing team he's got here, or one that he's been paired up with, but the players on his team, generally speaking, aren't as incompetent as you probably would expect. They are fairly capable in this match. Now, it is around this point in the game where Telescuffle's team starts to get their arse handed to them, but generally speaking, up until this point, they were handling themselves comparably well, and admirably so. I would say that his team didn't have arguably as strong a tank disposition as the enemy team did. So it makes it all the more impressive that they were able to hold on to the lead up until a couple of minutes ago. But as you can see now, the opposing team are leading, and it's a lead that they're going to hold on to for a fair little while. Telescuffle has to keep his eyes on the corners and streets and alleys as he moves forward, because while the Revalorise has well designed armour, it's not very thick, so anything remaining on the enemy team could quite easily punch through his armour. Now, originally I did think he had killed that medium, but of course it was an ally who had taken the trash out, so to speak. Now the scores are level again, but they won't be for very long, and Scuffle tries his best to get off a shot at that Russian medium, and he almost misses. And that's the thing, with this tank you have to really count your shots carefully because of its considerably longer reload compared to other tier 8 mediums, and you can't waste shots because while it carries a considerable amount of ammo, it's not a huge stockpile, so you have to be very careful and very selective with your shots. It's not like a minimum amount of ammo, but still, like, it pays to be careful and calculated with where you're aiming it and where you're leading your shots, especially when you're firing at moving targets, like you'll find Telescuffle doing a lot in this match. Now, him and this other tank are chasing down this enemy medium, and this medium has done a lot of damage to that British medium that was behind Telescuffle, but he gets revenge for his good buddy, only to realise that the enemy are up to half cap, and Telescuffle's tanks are now down to just himself and one other vehicle. Although that won't be the case for very long, because his last remaining ally gets his ticket punched. But Telescuffle spots this German light, smashes him up, and just in time as well, because he had over half the ticket points of the cap. So that was a very vital kill, especially considering that tank was much more manoeuvrable than Telescuffle's will ever be, even considering upgrades and add-ons. Now Telescuffle is faced with a bit of dangerous dilemma. He is facing up against a very capable medium tank and a very dangerous Russian tank destroyer, both of which are only on about half health, and Telescuffle is on full health. But if they coordinate together and use their increased rate of fire and their superior rate of fire, as well as their better armour, they can defeat Telescuffle. That is, if the tank destroyer doesn't just completely hold back and hide behind a building, while the medium on the enemy team rushes forward on its own to tackle Telescuffle toe-to-toe. And this is the situation where really going toe-to-toe with a Revalorise is basically the only situation where Telescuffle will win, because, well, he has just a hell of a lot more health at this point. He has conserved his health very carefully, using camouflage and his tank's manoeuvrability to not get into any up-face fronts and up-face fights and brawls. So now that he is faced up against two enemy tanks that are on very low health, he can afford to take shots like that from that enemy medium. And while it did shave a chunk of his health off, he's now got this one Russian tank destroyer to face off against, the Su-101. Although, as you'll see there, with a large number of Russian tank destroyers, the Su-101 is made of Stalinium and has a Klingon deflection field, as well as a Klingon cloaking field. You know, those Russians, they don't spare any expenses when they're designing their tanks. Now, at first, when I was watching this replay, I was a bit bemused as to why Telescuffle was taking this long of a route round the centre of the town. And the thing is, the Su-101 is on very low health, that Telescuffle could easily kill it with 1 or 2 shots. And you can see his team in the chat in a second starting to, you know, question why he's taking such a long route round to killing the Su-101, when in the time it could easily go to his cap, set up shop in a bush and wait for him and try to ambush him and have arguably a fair chance at killing him. Telescuffle has a lot more health than the Su-101, but he doesn't have as well designed armour or as good a sense of cloaking and camouflage ability. But the Su-101 doesn't stay put. Now, if I was the Su-101 and I was in this situation, I would try and go to the cap, or, you know, Telescuffle's cap, because that is where there is a lot of camouflage, where the Su-101 will thrive. Now, it's not advisable to go for the full cap. What I would do is I would try and cap the cap a little bit, and then try and hide in one of the bushes near the cap circle to try and ambush Telescuffle, and then retreat behind the bush when I've spotted him. But instead, it goes into the town where its fixed gun and arguably less impressive manoeuvrability is a real drawback. The Su-101 is a stealthy, quick tank destroyer. It is not an assault gun. So if you go into the town to go in a dogfight with a Revalorise that is on a high amount of health as this Revalorise is, you're going to get your ass handed to you on a platter with some roast potatoes, cheese sauce and pan-seared asparagus. But Telescuffle doesn't take any punches. He instead dishes them out after absorbing them and giving his enemy a bit of this same old treatment. And again, he takes a long route round, not wanting to get ambushed by the Su-101, and punches his ticket at last. 5 kills, and quite a hefty chunk of damage there, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner. A masterclass of driving the Revalorise from Telescuffle. Now, he could have gotten the top gun, but to be fair, his team didn't do terribly. They did get their asses handed to them about 2/3 into the match, but at the same time, they still managed to get 10 kills between them. They managed to dish out a fair bit of damage themselves, as you can see by the number of tanks littered around the early stage battle areas on the Siegfried line, behind Telescuffle, a bit further into the town. So his team didn't do too badly, but if it hadn't been for Telescuffle, this obviously would have been a loss, and the enemy team would have still had about 3 or 4 tanks come the end of the battle. But the tank is not invincible. It doesn't have amazing armour, and its manoeuvrability isn't as good as some of the other tier 8 premium mediums. But I hope more than anything this replay has shown you guys that even though a tank might have arguably weaker stats compared to comparable tanks or equivalent tanks of the same tier, it is the driver that is the most important thing. I've seen arguably weaker tanks in poor situations do really well based on the fact that they have a good commander and a good player behind them. So take that into account. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, you will have a battle where, say, a Revalorise going up against an IS-3 will always be 100% a win, when the Revalorise usually has a better commander than the IS-3, but generally speaking, I would say that a good player and a good commander is the most important thing behind a tank doing well in a battle of larger tanks. Now, I do recommend you check out Telescuffle's channel in the video description below. He hasn't uploaded there in a while, but I feel I should give him a shout out anyway, because he is the one who provided me with this excellent little replay and a good springboard off of which to describe the Revalorise and look into it a bit further and discuss a little bit of the general ethos of the Tier 8 Premium Medium tanks in World of Tanks. And if you did like this video, leave a like, comment, share and subscribe. Leave a comment particularly if you'd like to see more World of Tanks content on this channel. I mean, I'll probably still do some more anyway, because I do love doing it. And what other game videos you want to see on this channel in the future as well. And be sure to also check out my other YouTube channels and social media platforms in the video description below. And until next time, I've been Gitbag the Great. Stay safe, have fun with whatever you're doing, don't do anything I wouldn't do, and until next time, I have been Gitbag the Great, and I will see you on the battlefield. Bye-bye for now.